In this video, I'm going to show y'all how I make D&D combat fun, interactive, challenging, narratively driven, and immerses the players in the world. I have broken combat down into 5 questions that you should ask yourself when making an encounter. If you manage to get at least 3 to 4 of these in a given encounter, you can rest assured that your players will find something in it that they enjoyed. I have DM'd for about 13 years now, and I'm currently completing a Masters in Digital Culture where I've had extensive interaction with theory around video games, narratology, and ludology. I have myself created several game poems, so rest assured that I have just a bit of experience behind the words I'm about to spew. So, the core philosophy behind how I view D&D combat is that it should not just be a battle. If your combat can be boiled down to, we killed some goblins and got some gold, then I would highly advise you to reframe how you think about battles. I think battles are part narrative, part world building, and part challenge. In some way, the encounter needs to feel like it does something more than just give XP. If you want to grind for loot or XP, go play World of Warcraft. TTRPGs are so modular and in-depth and complex that you should use every ounce of it to your advantage. Make combat engaging, make players think, give players with a good eye for detail something to latch onto. Number 1. Further the narrative. Combat is a good way to further narrative. If your combat is just randomly rolled encounters with no further reason than XP or gold, I would advise you to try and add some narrative reason. So what is narrative? Narratives exist in many forms. I'm gonna define narrative as a collection of events and their many textual, subtextual, and contextual traits. You have the main story, you have individual character stories, you have interpersonal stories, you have background stories, and you have more global stories. You also have the textual part of a story, the literally told, you have the subtextual part of a story, the meaning behind it, and you have the contextual part of the story, the meaning arrived from one part put next to another. So, when I create an encounter, I try to think of ways the battle can play into and further these stories and their textual parts in some ways. Let's say we have a goblin encounter, and one of the PCs has a personal vendetta against goblins, because they killed their father or some shit. You should play into this. Make the last goblin surrender, and have the PCs argue whether to kill or let the goblin go. The PC with the vendetta would have to make a story-based choice that will inform their character, or maybe make the goblin encounter a scout party for a bigger goblin group, tied to the father's death. The first example is a subtextual and contextual building block. It lets the PC recontextualize the father's death and add subtext to the choice made. The latter is a more textual advancement in the character's story. Or maybe the encounter can tell a more global story. Maybe the goblins are a raiding party who were forced away from their former camp due to empire expansion. The goblins can make comments about the party being imperial scum, to make the party question why they are fighting at all. This gives subtext to a wider story. The goblins are not just evil monsters, they are surviving in a world built on expansion. Or maybe the goblins are mercenaries bought by the main bad guy to harass the farmlands. And when the party kill them, they find a contract between a mysterious person and the goblins. Any one of these will add depth to an encounter beyond goblins are evil. And that is how you should think about narrative combat behind the scenes. Why are they doing this? What led up to the why? Who are these enemies? What are their philosophies? What am I trying to tell with my campaign? Adding the imperial expansion part adds an anti-imperialist lens to the campaign. This can be a powerful message that may let the party decide to negotiate and de-escalate instead of kill and conquer. You should always ask yourself questions about why the enemy is there, and what it says about your world and your campaign at large. Make subtext, make context. An evil bad guy will have a philosophy driving their choices. Putting the bad guy's philosophy against another NPC's philosophy will deepen the contrast between them. Number 2. Build your world. Encounters should build your world in some way. They should say something about geopolitics, about tensions between nations, about food or norms or customs. They should breathe life into how your world operates, whatever niche your world has, and encounters should try to tell some sort of tidbit about your world. Obviously, this is tied to narrative, but it does not need to be tied to any one specific story, just overall deepen the existence of the world. If the encounter is an owlbear, maybe make it pre-wounded by hunters, and give the party a nature check to understand that the owlbear was outside of its normal habitat. They can add 2 and 2 together and understand that poaching and hunting maybe is an expanding part of this area. This sets up potential drama later, maybe even a quest about local hunting guilds illegally hunting in unsanctioned areas. Maybe the encounter is a bandit raid. Each bandit has their own little nuggets of world building potential. One bandit has some food on him, which is based on the local customs or racial customs. One bandit was in the midst of writing a manifesto on the local baron and his abuse of the workers, which is why he joined the bandits. One bandit might specifically target the dwarf due to his birth town having skirmishes with a dwarf settlement. Maybe the Goliath specifically targets the other Goliath because there's more glory in that kill than the others. Maybe it is a zombie attack and you can explain how the tattered corpse carries a certain symbol on it, dedicated to an important god in the region. This can even be tethered to a storyline about religious tension in the area. Or maybe lead the party to understand the man was zombified by foul play by a rival sect of the religion. Your encounters should in some way tell the players something about the world they inhabit. If you're really smart, which I ain't, you can tie the tidbits into narrative down the line. If you have planned a cult, tie the tidbits to the cult. Number 3. Introduce new or develop old mechanics. A good bit of combat is not just 1d6 damage with 30 hit points. It should feel like a puzzle. How do we get the flying enemy down on our level? The spears of the bandits are laced with drow poison. This creature burrows underground. Maybe they fight a group of aquatic enemies in a swamp that try to grapple and drown them. Maybe they fight someone who uses traps, which makes them use perception checks to find where they are. If you use something that is just 1d6 damage and 30 hit points, give it some extra fluff, either through abilities or environment to spice it up. Maybe the flying enemies will pick PCs up and drop them off of cliffs, or maybe they will tactically hide in the canopy. You can homebrew new mechanics as well, steal things from disparate areas, or develop what is already there. Maybe you have a general that gives bonuses, that can give his turn to move and attack with his minions, and maybe he can force them to keep fighting even after they reach 0 health by shouting commands at them. So the players have to take him out before they can kill the minions. One of the most memorable encounters I had was a Dragonborn Artificer, tied to the story about a plot about resurrecting a great dragon who used a type of soul magic, which elaborated on how my world works, to force the characters to attack each other if they had the opportunity. So suddenly, the players had to pay attention to their line of sight to each other, and they couldn't stand beside each other for fear of killing one another. They had to plan and reinvent how they played combat and learned how a specific new mechanic worked. And they were also much more focused on using up the enemy's reactions. If you have a mad druid, adding some trees that grapple and choke people is never a bad option. Adding environmental-based areas where the PCs can go but with risk is fun. Maybe the evil mage has null magic orbs that he can move on initiative 20, so the players have to play around these areas of no magic. Or maybe a large ogre specifically tries to hurl players at each other, which hurt both players. Suddenly they have to stay outside of the range from each other. Another memorable encounter was a compulsion monster that played on characters' compulsions. Wisdom save, or do compulsive thing. One party member jumped out the window head first, another threw her gun in the fiery hearth, slamming their hand in the door, making them unable to use that hand for a turn, and stuff like this. This is where you can steal shit from other games. I like to steal things from Don't Starve Together, like the Fuel Weaver's ability to summon minions to eat for health. Or Ancient Guardian's ramming attack, which when it hits a wall, makes random debris fall from the roof. You can steal anything that is transportable into the game. I make a lot of homebrew abilities and magic items for my players this way as well. Anything that makes combat feel new or different is a good way of creating memorable fights. It gives the players something to adapt to, and that makes them feel smart. Number 4. Be challenging. Much like narrative and world building fit nicely together, challenging combat is a brother to the previous point. Combat should be challenging. This is where I think every DM needs to be cautious of the CR rating. Do not trust it. You need to know your players and how they play. You need to be familiar with problematic mechanics and to stop using mechanics that do not teach the player how to work around them. Firstly, let's talk about why combat should be challenging and what that means. Combat should make the players think about several core things like position, terrain, resources, allies, damage type, crowd control, and unknown variables. A good combat encounter is more than just deal damage, take damage. It asks the players to both individually take charge and work together. This should be challenging. Combat should feel threatening. There should be a chance of death. Combat needs to be challenging to be satisfying. There is nothing satisfying about killing 3 goblins before round 1 is over. So make sure that the encounter tests the player's abilities. The bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. Not every combat needs to be knocking on death's door, but it should have the ability to if the players are careless. If you make combat challenging, it would feel like the party accomplished something. The core idea is that combat should be challenging in ways that is more than just damage and health. I want you to think about positioning and terrain when making combat encounters. It should be important where the party members are standing, not just in relation to each other, but to the enemies and to the terrain. You should use mechanics that enforce certain criteria around positioning and damage type, and the trade-off between dealing damage, healing, helping others, and using crowd control. The way I like to visualize this is by making at least 3 to 5 different kinds of objects on the battle map. If the battle is in a forest, you should have trees for sure, but also a large boulder, a couple of puddles or a river, a brush or 2 for hiding, and maybe even an old hunter's trap laying around. Then think about how the enemy can use this. Maybe a strong bandit can try to drown the players in the puddles by grappling them, or drag them over to the old trap and force them into it. Maybe an enemy rogue can hide in the bushes. Crossbowmen can poke out from beyond the boulder and take cover behind them, or be placed in trees. If the encounter is a troll, add boulders for it to throw, muddy patches for the players to get stuck in, and trees for the trolls to use as polearms. If the encounter is a feral druid or wood spirit, make the trees sprout roots that entangle players, so that they have to stay away from certain trees. Again, if the creature does not have an ability or trait that does these things, add them. Shape the stat block to their environment. Do not just plug and play without any thought. Think about how these creatures adapt to what's around them, and use that to their advantage. Secondly, let's tackle problematic mechanics. A good example of this is the ghoul. When the ghoul hits an attack, it has a chance to paralyze the target. This is, in my opinion, bad game design. One bad roll and you are out of combat immediately. Several bad rolls and the party is dead without much counterplay. There is no way to really work around this ability. A good mechanic should shape the way players interact with it. Should be counteractable. It should be solvable, much like a puzzle. A good mechanic tells the players, this thing is dangerous in a very specific way, so play around that. The only counterplay to ghouls is not getting hit, which means that all melee characters just have to run the fuck away. I like to homebrew this mechanic into a building problem. When the players get hit, they make a DC save, which is a bit higher than normal, 13 instead of 10. And if they fail, they get a paralyzing strike point. The first point halves movement speed, the second gives 0 movement, the third basically gives the slow spell condition, and the fourth fully paralyzes. This makes the mechanic counteractable in several ways. Instead of being a one and done deal, you give players with 2 to 3 points the ability to do stuff, which is more fun than doing nothing. Secondly, it is still a very crippling ability, but most importantly it means the party can help the players stay unparalyzed by moving them to the backline or using environments to their advantage. A player with 2 points can still be helped beyond the spell or just waiting. Give the ghouls a bit more health to make up for this nerf and you have a more dynamic fight on your hand. And it takes away the risk of a very unsatisfying combat that ends immediately because of a couple of bad rolls. You do not want to enforce abilities that are 1 DC away from a TPK, unless a bad guy is very much foretold to have such an ability. Then it comes down to bad planning and it's the party's fault. Abilities should use environment and conditions and should require parties to plan and overcome. It should engage more than just the hand that rolls the dice. Make monsters have abilities that adds a sense of urgency. Maybe the ghouls have a bite attack that adds a stack of bleeding that gets worse every turn if untreated. Or maybe the saliva makes the target hallucinate, so they may attack a creature that is not even there. The point is that you should exchange problematic mechanics with things that make the combat more tactical and engaging. Make the enemy rogue run up, steal an item from the player and use it. Maybe the mage has mage hand or some sort of telekinesis that can do the same. Maybe the strong barbarian enemy grapples and takes the item from them. Maybe he even takes the sword from the player and chucks it over an edge. This will introduce the idea that players can do the same to enemies and that they should be wary of what they are wielding. An engaging encounter does not only have one way of solving it. Even if combat starts, be ready to stop combat if a player does something smart. Bard uses Major Illusion to trick the enemy into thinking they teleported away. Make the enemy do an investigation check, and if they fail, good job Bard. Let the players know they can solve the encounter in whatever way they see fit. Rule number 5. Be fun. The last and most important point is that encounters should be fun. If a trait or ability ended up not being fun, don't use it again. Or change it. If an encounter was unfun, don't use it or change it. Anything that creates a feeling of wasting time around the table, skip it. If you follow all my other points, I believe you should be able to create fun encounters. But be ready to try and fail and drop what did not work. The first rule is fun.